The doors of the war hall slammed shut behind me, and every eye in that vast obsidian room turned toward the 17 of us standing in a line, waiting to be told what we had won. 10 days earlier, the Kryn Dominion had surrendered. 3 years of fighting across 5 star systems, and it ended not with a final battle, but with silence. A silence that felt heavier than any war. Now their generals wanted a ceremony, a tradition they called it, the rite of selection. Each victorious soldier would choose one royal ward as a token of the Dominion's respect. A prize. That word alone made my stomach turn, but refusing would have insulted a defeated enemy still trying to hold on to its dignity, and my commanding officer, Colonel Grant, had made it clear that we needed peace more than we needed pride. So there I stood, a low-ranking sergeant named Ethan Marsh, last in line among soldiers who outranked me by years and medals. I watched them walk forward one by one, and choose from a row of young Kryn nobles, standing on a raised platform at the far end of the hall. The Kryn were tall, elegant creatures, their skin covered in fine, overlapping scales that shimmered faintly under the light. Along their jawlines ran a bony crest, and I would soon learn that the color of that crest meant everything to them. Bright cobalt meant power, pale gray meant shame. One by one, my fellow soldiers chose the brightest crests in the room. The tallest, the most poised, the most celebrated names in Dominion society. Each choice was met with quiet nods from the Kryn elders, standing along the walls, as if the natural order of things was being restored. By the time it was my turn, only 3 wards remained. 2 of them still stood tall, chins lifted, clearly expecting to be chosen despite being passed over so many times already. But the 3rd one stood slightly behind them, shoulders drawn in, eyes fixed on the floor. Her crest was a dull, faded gray, the color of ash. The herald leaned toward me, his voice low. He explained, almost apologetically, that her family line carried an old disgrace. Something about her mother, something the court never let her forget. She was, in his words, the least desirable choice in the entire hall. I looked at her for a long moment. She never looked up. She had the posture of someone who had already accepted disappointment before it arrived. I raised my hand and pointed at her. The room went silent in a way that felt almost dangerous. Somewhere behind me, another soldier laughed under his breath. The herald blinked at me, as though I had misheard the instructions. "Sergeant," he said carefully, "there are still 2 wards of much higher standing available." I told him I had already chosen. Her name, I would learn on the transport ship home, was Ethera. She barely spoke during the entire journey back to our fleet, sitting stiffly in the corner of the cabin, watching me the way someone watches a storm they expect to break at any moment. On the 3rd day, she finally asked me why. Why had I chosen her, when I could see her crest, when I clearly understood what it meant to everyone in that hall? I told her the truth. I did not understand what her crest meant to her people. I only understood what her people had decided it meant, and that was something entirely different. She had no answer for that. I don't think anyone had ever separated those 2 ideas for her before. The war had ended, but the peace that followed was its own kind of battlefield. Political tension simmered beneath every meeting between our command and the remaining Dominion Council. Trade routes needed to be redrawn. Old alliances needed to be rebuilt from nothing. And in the middle of all that uncertainty, Ethera turned out to be far more than anyone expected. It started small. During a briefing about disputed supply routes near the Outer Rim, one of our analysts made an error in his estimate of Dominion fleet movement. Ethera, who had been sitting quietly at the back of the room as required by her new status, spoke up without waiting to be asked. She corrected the numbers, calmly, precisely, and explained exactly why the analyst's model failed to account for a seasonal shift in Dominion trade patterns. The room went quiet again, but this time for a different reason. Colonel Grant asked her to repeat herself. She did, and this time she kept going, laying out a complete picture of Dominion supply routes that none of our intelligence officers had managed to piece together in months. She had spent years sitting in rooms exactly like this one, overlooked and ignored, absorbing everything said around her, because nobody expected her to use it for anything. From that day forward, she was no longer just a name attached to my rank. She became part of every strategic discussion that mattered. 3 months after the ceremony, her knowledge saved lives. Intelligence reports suggested a Dominion splinter faction, unhappy with the surrender, was planning to disrupt a supply convoy heading through a narrow asteroid corridor. Our command believed the threat was minor, a few disgruntled soldiers acting alone. Withera disagreed. She recognized the coded language in the intercepted transmissions immediately, patterns she remembered from her childhood, spent listening to conversations nobody thought a shamed young ward would understand. She warned us that this was not a handful of angry soldiers. It was an organized attempt to reignite the very war that had just ended. Colonel Grant listened. He rerouted the convoy at the last possible moment, avoiding the corridor entirely. When our scout ships later confirmed that the splinter faction had indeed gathered there, waiting, the entire command staff understood how close we had come to a disaster that could have unraveled the fragile peace between our worlds. After that, nobody questioned my choice from the ceremony again. Euthera changed slowly after that day. She started speaking without waiting to be invited. She started sitting at the front of rooms instead of the back. Her crest never changed color. That dull gray remained a part of her, a permanent reminder of the life she had lived before. But something in the way she carried herself did change. She stopped looking at the floor. One evening, nearly a year after the surrender, we attended a formal gathering, marking the anniversary of the peace agreement. The same Dominion nobles who once looked past her without a second thought filled the room, dressed in their finest colors, crests gleaming with practiced pride. Someone asked a difficult question about long-term fleet coordination between our two peoples, a question that stumped even the most senior officials in the room. Euthera answered it without hesitation, laying out a plan so clear and so well-reasoned that the room fell into that same particular silence I remembered from the ceremony all those months ago. I stood at the edge of that gathering and watched her speak, watched the same nobles who once dismissed her, now leaning forward to listen carefully to every word. I thought about that first day in the war hall, about the 16 wards chosen for their bright crests and important family names, and about the one nobody wanted. People still ask me sometimes why I chose her. Out of everyone standing on that platform, I have given plenty of answers over the years. The strategic answer, the moral answer. But if I am honest with myself, the real answer is simpler than any of those. I looked down that line of wards and saw 16 people the room had already decided were valuable, and one person the room had already decided was not worth choosing at all. Something in me refused to accept a ranking built entirely on things a person never had any control over. A crest color, a mother's mistake, a family scandal from years before she was even born. So I chose the one nobody else wanted, not because I saw something special in her that day in the hall, because honestly, I did not know her at all yet. I chose her because I refused to let a room full of strangers tell me what a person was worth, before I had even spoken to her. Everything else, all the things she turned out to be capable of, all the times her knowledge changed the course of important decisions, all of that came later. That part was not luck. That part was simply what happens when someone finally gets the chance to be more than what everyone else already decided about them. Euthera stands beside me now during official meetings between our peoples, not as a prize or a token, but as one of the most respected voices in the entire Peace Council. Her crest is still gray. Nobody mentions it anymore. Nobody needs to. Sometimes the most valuable thing in the room is the one everyone else already decided to overlook.